Welcome back to Dodger Debate, a show that we thought was going to last a whole month, really ended up only lasting a week. I'm Dodger beat writer Jack Harris, along with our columnist Dylan Hernandez, subbing in for Bill Plaschke is Jorge Castillo. Guys, it was a 4-2 loss for the Dodgers in Game 3 of the NLDS. Lance Lynn gave up 4 home runs in the third inning, the first time the team had hit 4 home runs in an inning in postseason history. The Dodgers once again couldn't recover at the plate. They are swept out of the first round for the first time in 17 years. It's another early exit. How shocking was this to you, Dylan?
Well, you started kind of getting the feeling, right, that this is the type of series he was going to go into. And really, coming into today, really it was just like one question. Could they hit it all, right? And we kind of saw in the first inning, Mookie Betts, right, and we talked about this, right? At least Mookie Betts wasn't swinging at pitches that were balls. The bad thing is the pitch
progress.
The pitch, right? But he swung at something kind of down the middle, right? He just kind of rolled it over and grounded out, So you started kind of getting the feeling, like if this offense stays like this, how long can Lance Lynn possibly keep the Diamondbacks in the ballpark? You knew it wasn't going to be that long.
It was not.
It was not. It was right. And kind of like once it was over, it was kind of over. And again, I think that this was going to happen to them eventually, one way or another. But again, I was surprised, I guess, that this offense, that scored so many runs in the regular season, and even the funny thing, right, is I didn't like the back end of it much, and that's the part of the lineup that wound up driving in the 2 runs that they did have. I am surprised, I guess, that Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman just completely disappeared from this series. And fair or not, and I go, you can talk about small sample sizes. You got to wonder what's in here, right, or what's up here. Before the game, we were on the field watching the Phillies-Braves game up there, right, and you saw Bryce Harper, who kind of time and time again seems to be able to do these things. I do think, right, when you look at the Dodgers and their pitching situation, the front office, as much as they keep talking about how random the postseason is, what's happening to the Dodgers pitching is not random, right? That's just the result of having bad pitching. Now I think you have to kind of start asking, though, right? The lack of offensive production, is that random, or is that something symptomatic of something larger? And again, just I guess the juxtaposition of watching what they did to what Harper did right before, you kind of start thinking maybe there's a deeper rooted problem here.
Yeah, those 2 guys combined, they go 1 for 21 in the series. They didn't reach safely, either of them, after the first inning in Game 2. They had a lot of chances with guys on base in both of these last 2 games and came up empty. And I think that set the tone for the rest of the offense. Like, when you don't have those guys going, it's what Dave Roberts said all year. When Mookie goes, we go. Freddie Freeman is the catalyst for our offense. There's peer pressure for guys to get hits, and to see them struggle the way they did, Jorge, I don't think anybody could expect it. But I think it also revealed how kind of top-heavy this offense was, one that the team was hoping could compensate for some of the pitching problems.
Yeah, you guys have touched on it, man. Like, they weren't going to win anything if Freddie Freeman and Mookie Betts didn't hit. We can talk about the starting pitching, which was not good. Clayton Kershaw afterwards said the starting pitching especially was not good, and that's fine. It wasn't good. But they scored 2 runs in each of these games. You're not going to win playoff, baseball games with 2 runs. And, Dylan touched on, the whole, randomness argument. I've come to the conclusion that that's just a lazy take on this stuff. We see players step up. The same players sometimes stepping up October after October after October. You mentioned Bryce Harper. Carlos Correa had a really good postseason with the Twins until they got eliminated today. Kike Hernandez showed up for the Dodgers, and that's not random. Chris Taylor put a charge into a ball that almost tied the game, or whatever was the 9th inning, or pulled them within 1. He had an RBI single today. He has a history of stepping up in big moments. Cody Bellinger had a history. Jock Peterson had a history. Corey Seager had a history. Sometimes it's not, just because you can't identify it or quantify it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And it exists. And these guys need to find guys who can step up in October. This is now 2 Octobers in a row where the offense was the issue. We talk about the pitching and decisions and starting rotation and all this stuff. The offense was an issue last year, and the offense was an issue again this year. And they got to fix that.
Yeah, and I think that gets to the big question that a lot of people are going to have coming out of this series. When you look at it, especially in the lens of last year, them having a similar fate, winning 100 games, losing to a Padres team they had been better than all season. They lost, a similar story in 2019. That 2020 World Series right now looks like a really big aberration, especially when you consider the circumstances around it. So, A, Dylan, do the Dodgers have an October problem? And B, what are the roots of it? How do you fix it if they do?
Yeah, again, I agree with Jorge, obviously, that the offense was the problem. I do think, though, the pitching gave them no chance, right? I mean, they were dead up on arrival, right, when October started. And so, to me, it kind of starts there. And I really think that,
Dylan,
yeah.
Okay, that's fine. And I've watched these videos, and you were saying, Bill was saying they were going to go undefeated and 11-0, and you were saying it was going to affect them next round.
Right.
For them to be that just anemic against the Arizona, Brandon
I
Pfaadt, I don't know
yeah.
how to say his name. No disrespect, but Merrill Kelly and Zach Gallen were not good against these guys this year, and haven't been their whole careers pretty much. Merrill Kelly's been terrible against the Dodgers, and he shut them down. And I understand, game one, you get punched in the face, they're shell shocked and all that. They were in game two.
Yeah.
They were in this game. The offense just didn't step up.
No, I agree. But I guess it's when I think, right, when Jack brings up the October problem thing, it's kind of like, okay, where do they go from here, right? What do they kind of have to address? What do they have to change? And, the reality is Freeman's under contract for 4 more. Betts is under for 9. That's pretty crazy. But right, so, and there are good players. That's the thing. I do think that they're at least physically capable of doing this, right? It doesn't matter, if you took all the Dodgers pitchers and they all had the greatest, performances of their lives, I still don't think they can win the World Series, right? Something would at some point, right, just kind of catch up to them. And I do think that kind of goes back again to this, and maybe it's all part of a larger issue, this whole, right, they want to play it kind of safe all the time, right? The whole thing about the front office and their approach here is, right, they've always talked about sustained success, and they never push their chips kind of all in, right? And every time they do make a deal, right, even at the deadline, right, when they got, Darvish was the guy to get, Scherzer was the guy to get, they got those guys on their terms, right? Even the one free agent pitcher that they've gone out to get, Trevor Bauer, right, they got, on a very team-friendly contract. So
Mookie and Freddie, same thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Relatively friendly.
And at least those, they kind of got lucky in that, right? They were able to get really, right, these high-level guys really kind of fell out of the sky for them. But I do think that this unwillingness to take any kind of bold steps has kind of resulted in this magnification of this problem that they have of, right, they devalue starting pitching. They do not, it's not a priority, and you go down even to the lower levels of the minor leagues, we talked about this last time, these guys don't pitch at all, right? And the philosophy is, right, and I know the game is kind of going down this route of, have these guys throw as hard as they can for as long as they can, and if that's 5 innings, we'll take them out and kind of bullpen it together. But we've seen that, right? It does have value to have a guy that can go 6-7 innings and get through a lineup 2-3 times.
And I think the irony is, on paper, games 2 and 3, you can make the argument that they pitched well enough to win. They only gave up 4 runs, the bullpen delivered. The problem is, and this is the thing that you can't factor in when you're coming up with these game scripts, and also gets to the Mookie and Freddie and the offense point is, yeah, they only gave up 4 runs in those games, but they came early in the games, they came in really shocking ways, and I think that it was pretty evident that once they fell behind, you could see the lineup start pressing. That's when you saw Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman really start chasing pitches. That's when you saw the quality of at-bats go down. Early in this game tonight, Brandon Pfaadt was throwing pitches right down the middle, and they just weren't hitting them.
Yeah.
It was later when you saw them start to put pressure on themselves and expand the strike zone and do the things that Dave Roberts has talked about. We can't do. This is why we can't manufacture in high situation moments with guys in scoring position and whatnot. So to me, it's a combination of all these things. It's not having enough of a traditional starting pitching staff that can not only put zeros on the board, but give your lineup the confidence to take off some of the pressure and perform like they do more in the regular season. It's the fact that the guys they have here, to your point, aren't stepping up in these big moments. In the 8th inning today, Colton Wong, of all people, drew a 4-pitch walk, and then Mookie Betts goes down swinging, Freddie Freeman goes down swinging, JD Martinez hits a can of corn, and that was their last best chance with your best players at the plate, and they don't deliver. And I think that's where it gets a little complicated here for the Dodgers to try to work out of. It's not just trying to get better starting pitching, which, by the way, beyond just the young guys, you look at the last year, they were in on Pablo Lopez, but they didn't want to go all the way. They thought he cost too much, and now he's having a good postseason with the Twins. They could have had Jordan Montgomery at the trade deadline. They thought it wasn't worth the value. Look at the postseason he's having with the Rangers. They were in on Justin Verlander, couldn't get that done. So that goes back to your point. They're kind of in position to do some of these things.
They signed Noah Syndergaard.
Yes, instead they had Noah Syndergaard. They had Lance Lynn was the big trade deadline acquisition, who's pitching Game 3 over one of the young pitchers, by the way, in Ryan Pepio, who they talked about wanting to trust so much.
Who didn't pitch at all.
At all. It's all these little things that I think add up, and they don't become exposed in the regular season. But when you're in a series against a team that's playing well and things aren't going your way, you need some of that star power, some of that stronger foundation to fall back on. And I think that's the thing in these last 2 years that's been missing.
There's first of all, because every year Dave Roberts, hears it, and this one's not on Dave Roberts. My estimation, the starting pitchers the last 2 games gave up 3 runs and then 4 runs, and the bullpen gave up 1 run in whatever how many innings.
Starters
He
gave
made
up 13 runs, got 14.
he made the right moves with the bullpen and all that. I know he always hears it after every year,
And one of the reasons he left Lance in that game tonight after the first 2 home runs is that he knew after Game 2, using all his back-end relievers as hard as he did, you still have to win the series. So you can make an argument he could have pulled him out early, but he's also operating under the stress of not having a very well put-together pitching staff.
Yeah, and just going off what you said about the starting pitching, at some point you have to recognize also, we're talking about the randomness stuff. There is a formula that's kind of surfaced here in the last few years, going back to 2019 with the Nationals. Super talented, top-heavy teams that have 2 to 3 great starting pitchers are really good in the postseason. We're seeing it with the Phillies again. We saw it with the Phillies last year. The Houston Astros always have great starting pitching. They're always in the CS. They've gone to the World Series a bunch. And the Nationals did it in 2019. And for, whatever reason, the Dodgers ignore that, and they're trying to do it their way. I think it's pretty obvious. Get 2 guys who can pitch deep into games. Aaron Nola, Zach Wheeler, Framber Valdez, Justin Verlander, these guys are out there doing it for other teams. And for some reason, the Dodgers that's not. And one other thing, we were talking about all the moves they didn't make and all that. Going into this season, the only surprise thing you can really say that maybe was out of the blue is what happened to Julio Urias getting arrested and being suspended. Clayton Kershaw has been dealing with injuries the last several years. Tony Gonsolin had a forearm issue at the end of last year, then signed a weird 2-year contract that kind of I think raised all of our was on our radar. It's kind of strange.
And wasn't exactly pitching well before he had surgery.
Dustin May coming off Tommy John surgery. You were going to really depend on him. Walker Buehler was a long shot to return. Those are 4 guys you have question marks about. So there was just no depth after that. And you're in the spot now where you're dealing. Evan Sheehan was not supposed to be here this year. Maybe Pepio, maybe Bobby Miller, Gavin Stone didn't develop the way that they expected. But when you're leaning on these guys to come up and perform and do well on big stages, that's just a huge risk. And these guys they didn't hedge it at all.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference. Is that plan worked really well in the regular season, especially down the stretch. One of the reasons they were so good in August is because guys like Ryan Pepio and Bobby Miller and Emmett Sheehan were kind of filling in these different roles in different ways. Some of them were both guys. They were following openers, but it was working. But you put them under the bright lights here. You put them in a tight margin for error against a team, and when the D-backs, who played really well. Part of the story here is that the Diamondbacks, including their young players, played really well. Corbin Carroll, Gabriel Moreno,
Brandon Pfaadt pitched really well today.
Huge series. And you put the Dodger players in these situations where the level of execution has to be so high, the margin for error is so thin, and again, when you don't have something like what you're saying, that star power to fall back on, those guys to be able to give you a dominant start. Like these last 2 postseasons, the best start came from Tyler Anderson last year, a guy they didn't even bring back this year when they could have had a chance to. So I think, as you look forward, how do you change this? Is it the personnel of who's running the team, of who's in the dugout? Is it the overall approach of how they go into the offseason, of how they allocate their resources here? Because I think it is, to me, and it seems like you guys agree, pretty clear that what they're doing right now, there's a reason this is happening. This is not just a crapshoot thing. This is not just a random couple bad weeks in October. There are real things here that they need to fix about how they build the roster with the postseason in mind. How do you do that?
Yeah, and I think, as we were kind of getting, there were, especially early on in the Andrew Friedman tenure, there were a lot of guys from, the previous regime that were, left over, and we kind of, and I mentioned this last time, but before Urias got suspended, the 1 and 2 starters were from, the previous regime, which is crazy to think about, given that Ned Coletti hasn't been around in how long, I think, to me, it comes down to, I think, a lot of, I do think the front office is also, they've had some pretty, significant departures, and Farhan Zaidi and Alex Antopoulos, who are now like GMs of major market teams. I think that diversity of thought doesn't really exist now. I mean, these guys. I mean, let's say. I mean, we've been joking about this for weeks now. They all dress exactly the same. They talk exactly. Like Andrew Friedman likes to talk like this, like he's holding some imaginary objects. I mean, you look at Brandon Gomes. He talks like this. They carry the same exact bottle brand of water. I'm not a big water guy.
Essential.
Yeah, I'm a
Yeah,
Sparklets guy, but they all have like their water bottle. They look the same. They sound the same. And I do wonder, if maybe you kind of need to mix it up there, right? And I don't think, look, this is in some ways, right? Again, I was here through the McCoy years. I've seen what this organization could be like in a bad way, right? And I do think you do give them credit for, getting through the regular season every year. And they found a formula, right, to win probably 95 games. And, right now with Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman being as good as they are, that pushes them into maybe 100 realm territory. They figured that out, and there is value in that, right? Let's not pretend there isn't.
Yeah.
But I do think maybe to kind of take that next hump over, you need somebody that's going to maybe push Friedman to be a little bit more aggressive, right? And, right? And
to me, that's an ownership thing.
Yeah, and I think to Stan Kasten's credit, right? And Mr. Kasten and I have had our differences over the years, but I think right initially Friedman wanted Burns as his, right? That was the word, was that he wanted Burns as his GM. And Kasten was supposedly the guy that kind of put his foot down and no, you gotta go get somebody else, and they got Farhan Zaidi, and I think that was a very fruitful partnership, right? And now, as we see these two guys, they probably need each other more than either guy wants to acknowledge. But maybe something like that might work, right? Where you're just kind of interjecting new ideas. And look, when something like that first happens, it's going to be uncomfortable, right? You never want to be in a position where your coworkers kind of jam down your throat. But maybe in this situation, that's what they need.
Yeah, I think what Dylan was talking about is diversity of thought is important. Getting different ideas in the building, people who come from different backgrounds or whatever and think differently maybe about the game, and not necessarily like something completely different, but a little bit.
Something that could help identify the players that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I just think it's like they also don't need to go out there and spend a ton of money. You can identify guys who are in your budget or whatever budget you may have, and there are guys that sign for modest deals that sometimes step up in October.
And who was really big for the Diamondbacks? Tommy Pham, another player that was available for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And some of that stuff, baseball is a very old game. And one of the words that's been around for a long time is makeup. And sometimes, you can't, it's hard to identify sometimes, it's hard to quantify, but makeup matters in this kind of stuff. And I think that's basically what we're talking about is you need guys with different kinds of makeup.
I think one of the issues that they have, though, is because they platoon so much, right? The same guy who's not afraid to swing the bat as hard as he can in October is also the guy who's not going to be afraid to tell his manager to go take a hike because he's playing,
sure.
Right? And again, we've seen, I think, kind of they don't really value dissent here, right? Like even, there's some people I think that would kind of look, okay, he's got a strong personality, I like that. They like things a little bit more kind of quiet, and again, right? Because it's about the they're looking at the 6-month regular season, and okay, we don't want to cause any kind of waves, unless we can get the guy for really cheap, in which case we might sign Trevor Bauer. But, I do wonder, again, but that comes, I think, with the diversity of thought, again, in the front office, right, where you can kind of, again, you get different voices in there. Maybe they do take a chance on somebody like that. And you know what? I do think, too, like clubhouse dynamics are really interesting, right, because I don't know, let's just take Clayton Kershaw, for example, here, right? I mean, who knows if he'll be back or whatever. But I do think, if...
Yes, a small subplot to all this.
Right. But, I've seen over the years, right? I mean, Kershaw said something, I remember there was like one time, like Kershaw said something nice about Puig. And Puig was so well behaved for like the next 10 days, which I feel was like the maximum of like Puig's attention span. No, but right, there are little things like that where guys are kind of, okay, Matt Kemp was considered kind of like a, troubled soul, so to speak, in the clubhouse, right? They brought in Davey Lopes, and all of a sudden this guy's like showing up early and like doing base running stuff before every game. So there are little, there are little things that you can do, I think, to kind of like, protect yourself against the possibility that some, guy's going to come in and just kind of wreck the whole place. And I think it's just about being kind of diligent, right? And, going back to that that Kemp thing, I remember, right, is a big priority for like Ned Coletti in that offseason. Okay, how are we going to get the more out of Matt Kemp? We need more out of Matt Kemp to win, and he found a way to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned the subplot. Now we're going into the offseason, and there's two questions really hovering around this team. It's Clayton Kershaw's future, and it's Shohei Ohtani going to show up? And, you know, Ohtani wouldn't pitch next year, which isn't many pitchers, but he'd be a big draw. He'd help get, you know, he'd help.
And he would hit here. I mean, given what we
yes.
saw in the WBC,
Yeah.
he's not afraid.
He's not afraid.
Here in the playoffs,
Yes,
right? He
yeah.
would hit in the playoffs.
Yes,
And
he would.
that would at least be one thing, you know, and I think, you know, I'm not sure, right, depending on, like, again, I have no idea what they're thinking of spending kind of this off season, and if they really want to, you know, right, kind of, right, outdo, you know, like the Mets. So assuming this is going to get done like in steps, right, I'm not sure that this is necessarily like a 1 year fix type deal.
Right.
You know, you take what you can, right? I mean, because there's no guarantee also that Ohtani's going to show up just because you want him. You know, I think if you can get Ohtani, you get him because, again, they do need that guy in this lineup, right? They do need that, you know, a few years ago, right, Jorge and I were kind of big on the whole Bryce Harper to LA idea,
Sure.
right? This would be a guy like that, right? And you get the additional bonus that, you know, theoretically in the future, he's going to be able to pitch again, right? Even though, you know, he's coming off a second Tommy John, and that's going to be a little bit, right, that's tricky. It was tricky the first time for him, but I think if you can get the guy, you absolutely have to get him.
Well, a lot of questions.
We're going to just skip over Kershaw here?
Well, I mean, we can talk
I mean,
about
the guy
it.
was, you know, semi-important player for the Dodgers for the last 15 years.
I mean, look, with the Kershaw thing,
Not disrespect.
Guys,
This guy's been pitching as long as he's been alive, man.
look, with Kershaw, we don't know.
We don't.
He said post-game tonight
Yeah.
he doesn't know how he's going to feel this offseason. I think the health of his shoulder is obviously a huge factor in all this. I wouldn't be surprised if it plays out sort of like it did after 21, where he gets into the winter, he sees how it's feeling, he'll, you know, figure out, can I be a competitive pitcher for a contending team? The Dodgers would obviously love to have him back. They could probably use his production. Like, even at the end of the regular season, they really needed, even with the diminished stuff, what he brought. But yeah, it's just another kind of question mark into, especially what it almost is feeling like a bit of a transitional period in some ways.
Right.
This question of, will a Mookie, Freddie-centric team, like, can you still win with them? And I think having like the Kershaw question, the young pitcher questions, the Ohtani questions, kind of all factors in with that, and becomes more magnified when you do struggle in the postseason like this, in my opinion.
This is not a great free agent class for pitching either, right?
there's some guys out. I mean, there are a few guys out there.
Yeah.
Blake Snell's going to win Cy Young. You got Aaron Nola, who's having another good postseason.
Who's Blake Snell represented by?
That's right. Well, that's another
Scott
issue.
Boras.
Yeah, that was my theory. Was, you know, pre-suspension, right? I thought Arias would actually end up here in Arizona.
Sure.
And Scott does his musical chairs thing.
Doesn't
You
usually
know.
end with his best players wearing Dodgers gear either.
No, but I mean, they're kind of in a position, right, where again they have to do something.
Yamamoto's out there. The other, you know,
Yep.
guy from Japan is going to come over here.
I'm very curious to see how much these two postseasons back-to-back kind of influences their approach to that, especially after last offseason when they had a bad offseason.
Do you think that they're? I don't know, man. Like they still haven't admitted that they messed up with Bauer,
Well, yeah, they're not going to publicly, you know,
or even
do things
privately.
to
Like
this- but
the
I-
arrogance there.
That's my question.
Yeah.
Is that I think up until, especially this series, to get swept like this, like, there were enough kind of built-in excuses. And I'm going to be curious when we hear from Andrew Friedman and Brandon Gomes at some point in the coming days. Do they say, yeah, there are things we need to fix, or do they say, you know what, Chris Taylor's
Well,
ball
see, they're-
would have been a home run in 28
They'll never
ballparks?
see. I don't think that they'll say it because it's
Right,
gonna
if
it's
they'll-
gonna
if
cost
they'll
them
come to
leverage.
that
Yeah.
conclusion
But I
in
think
their actions.
right. But they're gonna go. Bueller's coming back. May's coming back. Gonsolin's coming
And
back.
that's the other thing.
Right, and
They
that's
have all these young
right. And
pitchers.
we've seen, and that's the thing, right? It's like they're going to their history, or you know, recent history has kind of been counting on guys they would be stupid to count on, right? Just like I was dumb to count on all these rookies coming up, right? I don't think it's smart to count on 3 guys coming off like arm surgery.
Sure.
but that's what. But the thing is, they're going to be like, well, we got these 3 guys coming off arm surgery. We got these 3 rookies from this past year,
And I think
and
that-
we're gonna right, and then we're gonna right. They're going to sign like a guy here, a guy there, and now we have 10 guys, and we're going to win 100 games again.
And I think that is the default path. That is probably what I would have assumed they were going to do before watching this series. And that's what I'm curious is, did this series, coupled with all the other October failures of recent years, has that done enough to tip the scales to where they do need to alter their...
Because I think the danger of like, right, kind of pushing all in, I mean, we haven't addressed this part, right? There is a danger in kind of pushing all in, right? I mean, the worst case scenario is you turn into the Angels.
No, but if you
right?
push all in and all we hear is, and for good reason, is they are really good at developing talent, right? Drafting, identifying, acquiring talent, developing it.
Yes.
If you are really good at that,
Especially the role kind of pieces.
yeah, if you're really good at that, and they are, then you can afford to maybe push it in more than the Angels, who have no history of not being able to
But
develop
are these guys
people.
though? I mean,
think
they have like numbers, right?
I
They have a
think-
lot of,
I
but they
think-
have 1 ace so far
I
in
think
Bueller.
the floor will always be higher than like the Angels.
Right. Okay. Right. That was like I mean, that's a total nightmare situation.
Right.
Right. But there's, I mean, well, like take the Padres, right? Where, okay, so 1 year they get to an LCS, another year, right? This year they just like completely crashed out. I mean, that becomes a possibility, right?
But
You know,
at
the
the
Padres
same
finished
time-
2 games worse than the Diamondbacks.
I know.
Yeah. I don't think it's like a mutually exclusive, oh, are we a playoff team that sucks in the regular season? Or are we a great regular season that's not built for the playoffs?
But
Like,
I
I think you can be good at both. And if there was a team, like that's the thing to me, if there was a franchise and a group of front office personnel and coaching staff that should be able to do both things, it's probably this one.
I agree.
And they haven't.
Yeah, and well, this goes
gone that
right,
far
but this
down
goes
that
this goes back to your thing about like ownership, though, right? You have an absentee owner. He's not here, right? And the guy's kind of clueless. Like, okay, like while we're at it, let's go at Mark Walter. He shows up to game 1 in a Jackie Robinson jersey and like sunglasses.
The black
It's like I don't know how old the dude is, but like I don't know, man.
All right.
Just like you know what I mean. Like
Here's something.
I wrote it earlier. Steve Cohen had a bigger on-field presence at Dodger Stadium this year. Mark Walton.
Here's something. Is it a coincidence? Is it a coincidence that the Tampa Bay Rays, Andrew Freeman's previous organization, where a lot of his guys are still there, that they haven't made it past the ALDS since they went to the World Series in 2008? Is it a coincidence that the Dodgers and the Rays met in the World Series in 2020 when depth mattered a lot more in the postseason and they were playing pretty much every day? Is it a coincidence that the Dodgers, a souped-up version of the Rays, spending more money, have these kind of issues in the playoffs? They've obviously, they've gone to more CS and more World Series, but there's something there. Is it a coincidence? It's 15 years worth of, with the Rays, they haven't gone to the World Series since 2008.
Yeah.
And these guys, I'm not saying they all think exactly the same, but they come from the same school of thought in a lot of things.
There's a little governor there, right? And again, I think as a somebody, right, if I were a fan paying money to watch a team, investing in season tickets, I would want them to periodically, again, kind of push the chips into the middle of the table, because you see like again, and you can argue this thing both ways, right? But you do see the excitement that something like that causes. I mean, Petco Park was packed for, they had the greatest fan fest, whatever. Season wasn't as great, but they had a great fan fest.
It'll happen. If they get Ohtani, it'll happen.
Yeah.
But there's nobody else, at least that I know of off the top of my head, that would generate that excitement, that sort of like a new type of excitement for the Dodgers next year. So,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, good for the good
I was
little
gonna say,
desert town
I'm
here.
not letting you out of here.
No.
After you're beating up on my home city all week, without saying one nice thing about the little desert town.
Yeah, I mean, here we are in the
You
stadium.
See the pool party? The pool was waiting.
It was
The pool
awaiting. It was
was
just
awaiting.
for the
Just
wrong
like
team.
Diamondbacks played well. The Diamondbacks played really
They
well.
did.
They did.
They did. They played well. Their pitchers stepped up.
The crowd here tonight, I was
Crowd.
expecting like a 50-50 split. It was 80% at least.
At least.
It's
Steve
so
fans.
weird how like nobody's like in downtown, right? It's like a ghost town almost now.
Wow,
There's like
good
nothing
people
going.
down
There's like
there.
nothing going down here.
You gotta go up.
This is like literally like the only thing is going on. It's
Well,
like literally right here.
NBA
Let's go a few
preseason
blocks
yesterday.
that way.
There's some NBA preseason
Oh,
yesterday down there.
Yeah.
With the real big three, they didn't play. Anyway, it's late. We're getting loopy. We thought we were in for a long October. We're not. Dodgers get swept in the NLDS. We will have a ton of coverage on LATimes.com. Go there. You can pick up the print paper too. For
Yeah.
Dylan, Jorge, I'm Jack. Thanks for watching.